I feel like everything I have to say about this book is just like the Jo March picture from Little Women, where she's just like, women, women. That's what it feels like. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Stefania Gonzalez. I'm a New York-based actor, audiobook narrator, someone who truly spends more time doing old lady things than maybe a 25-year-old should. And these are my real reviews. This book, The Nightingale by Kristin, was one that I really didn't want to pick up. I'm not really super into historical fiction around World War II. No offense, Mom, but my mom loved this book, which usually means that it's not a book that I would love or enjoy, but I was proven wrong. I was proven wrong, and I'm glad that I listened to other people's reviews and how much they loved this book so that I was able to pick it up. So, this story, The Nightingale, is the story of two sisters who are separated by duty, by war, and by love, and how each of them has to endure their own survival and their own sacrifice for what they feel is the greater good and like morally good. And I think that this book poses a lot of interesting questions of the morality in action. These two sisters, one is named Vian and the other is Isabel. So Vian is kind of like the poster child of the two sisters. She got married, she had kids, her husband is going off to fight in the war. They're kind of like the picture perfect family. And Isabel is the sister who gets kicked out of every finishing school she's sent to. Her dad doesn't really want her around. She just feels like she doesn't fit in anywhere, and especially with the war coming, she feels that the war is coming and everyone else kind of calls her crazy. And she meets a group of people who are, initiating this kind of underground rebellion against the Nazis. Also, it's so interesting to read a World War II book that's not taking place in Germany or taking place in France. Like, France is never really a place in Europe that I thought about. I knew it was involved in World War II, but just as much as any other country that I think about. It was really cool to see how perhaps some of these things impacted the lives of people who were never directly involved. Isabel gets involved in these kind of rebellious acts where she is passing notes, she is accepting secret messages, she's being what they call the nightingale, where she is trading information secretly between people and being their kind of source of communication. Vian, on the other hand, her husband has gone to fight in the war, and the townspeople, in a mode of survival, have to bend towards the Nazis' will in order for them to survive themselves. So, for example, Vian has to house a Nazi general or captain. I don't remember. She has to house one of them in her home and let him eat her food and let him sleep there and let him use it how he likes. And she really does it based on the safety of her daughter, Sophie. She doesn't want Sophie to get in any trouble. She doesn't want to put a spotlight on their family. She wants her husband to come home safe. She really is trying to play the picture perfect oblivious French woman who's trying not to get involved so that her family stays intact. Isabel, on the other hand, doesn't really have anything to lose. Isabel has always been rebellious, but her father has already kind of pushed her out. She escapes Paris when the invasions start in Paris. She escapes by foot with another man who ends up being her love interest in the end, but she ends up in her sister's house and is able to stay there with her. And I think that them living together through the first part of the book shows a really beautiful parallel of how these two women are handling sacrifice in different ways. Isabel will not put up with this Nazi soldier living with them. Like, she will talk back to him, she will avoid dinner with him, she will do anything to get away from him. Whereas Vian feels that Isabel is putting their family at risk because she's doing these things. And Isabel thinks Vian's being a coward by not saying anything. So there's a really interesting parallel that I think parallels a lot to how we see political activism today, in terms of, like, you don't really know what other things people have going on when you see them not being as active as you would like to see, or when you feel like you're not doing enough but you have other things. It's a really interesting dynamic of sacrifice and what becomes the breaking point for someone to take action. And that's especially explored through WOMEEEn, because there comes a point where she does begin her rebellion in her own way. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. One of the things that I think that's really strong about this book and that makes it really unique is that Kristin Hannah can like paint with words. And I know that a lot of authors, like, that's literally their job, but Kristin Hannah, you can see everything like vividly, and it's written beautifully. It's not just like detail. It's like poetry in motion. And I also think what makes this book really unique is that I think it's kind of weird that men are obsessed with war, but traditionally, but it's interesting to see a World War II historical fiction that centers around women and really highlighting, you know, the silent role that these women played in such an important time period, and how they're often overlooked for other men who were maybe on the front lines or who had power and were shown. And this book, it's not based on true facts, as in like these two characters didn't exist, but there were people most likely who did these things, who were able to pass these notes and who were able to, you know, ferry men across mountains in order for them to be safe. The book is bookended kind of by WOMEEEn in the future. We don't know that it's WOMEEEn, but WOMEEEn in the future being invited to a celebration of the Nightingale, aka her sister Isabel. And she debates for a long time whether or not to go to this celebration because she feels like she never did enough, and that Isabel was the one who took the charge on all of these rebellious acts for the greater good. It's interesting that Isabel only gets the recognition for her work and for her sacrifice and her courage post-mortem. I think it was like 50 years later, something like that. Like some milestone anniversary was the first time that she was being recognized for her work, and she wasn't even there to see it. So I think that speaks a lot to the role that women play in war and in rebellion. And I know that Kristin Hannah writes a lot of these books about war from a female's perspective because their stories are often not told. It was really endearing and drawing and showed a completely different side of the war that is not normally shown. I mean, you look at movies like All Quiet on the Western Front or 1917 or literally any of these war movies, and few, if any, ever focus on how the women contributed. Because the fact is, like, these men would not have won these wars without the women doing the work behind the scenes. And I also like that it was not revolving around romance. You know, having a female lead characters didn't revolve around romance. There was romance, there was hints of romance, but it wasn't the main driving force of the story or the main plot points of the story. This book is also a really interesting parallel to our modern climate because things move so quickly in this book. We start the book, war has been going on in Germany and Poland and reaching from there, but everyone kind of thought that it would be over quickly. Like, people didn't want another war so quickly. People were really ignorant to the fact that war was coming, that a huge war was coming. And this ignorance, this refusal to believe that this could happen again, allowed people to ignore signs that were glaring red flags. It's just like a panorama of how quickly these thoughts and ideas planted in people's heads can just tailspin 180 degrees, and suddenly you're in the most violent war of your modern time. You see how things get progressively worse, and knowing that this is the first time you're experiencing this, and knowing that you don't really have a precedent to come up against, how do you sacrifice everything? How do you sacrifice everything not knowing what tomorrow will bring? And that's another thing, is that they didn't know when this war was going to end. We know retroactively, we know the exact date and the exact time that the war is over. But these people, they truly had no idea how long it would go. And I think that marks a stark difference in Isabel taken immediate action because she felt if she did something right away, maybe it would be over sooner, versus Vian, who was kind of playing the long game, where she knew that this would not be over right away. And until my husband comes home, nothing is certain. And I need to protect my family. I need to protect the people that I love. It really isn't until she reaches a breaking point and can no longer stay silent with all the destruction that's happening around her, especially with the people that she loves. The violence in this book, it wasn't graphic. It wasn't graphic, but it was intense. I mean, we see a 9-year-old girl get shot in the back as they're trying to flee for freedom. And I think that's what radicalized Vian. She saw her best friend, who had never been affiliated with any political party, who had never done anything wrong, never stepped out of line. The only thing that was wrong was that she was Jewish. She tried to help her out of the city gates, and her 9-year-old daughter was shot in the back. Then it progressively gets worse, that not only is her 9-year-old daughter shot and killed, then she gets taken away. Her best friend, Rachel, gets taken away to a concentration camp. And we learn later that Rachel died in the camp. And Vian takes in her best friend's other child and raises him as her own because she knew that was the only way to keep him safe. And that kind of spurs Vian into being like, I need to do something because this is not going to end. This is not going to stop here. And that's when she decides to take the children of Jewish families and put them in a Christian orphanage, saying that their parents died in the war or that they don't know where their parents are, and erasing any semblance of Judaism or of any ancestry being Jewish to save them. And even to go a step beyond that, she didn't only put them in this orphanage and strip them of their identity to save them, but she made sure that she had records of every single child that went in there hidden with the nuns at this orphanage, so that when the war ended, these parents could find their children again. Like, that is so dangerous, so courageous. And people, I feel like people complain that like Vian started helping too late. But again, she did not know how long this was gonna go, and she did not know how far it was gonna go. From an outsider's point of view, we can say that, yes, she should have done something sooner, but truly, she was just trying to live to the next day, especially when the German captain would touch her in the night, you know? She feels like she has more to lose. She has her job to lose, which she did lose. She had her husband to lose. She had her daughter to lose. She had her sister and her father to lose. Isabel kind of felt like she had nothing to lose. And that's why Isabel was able to do the things she did, like hold for New York Sound. Isabel takes one of the strongest and most dangerous choices and decides to walk United States airmen who have fallen across the border. And that's when her notoriety as the Nightingale, people didn't know she was the Nightingale, but the notoriety of the story of the Nightingale begins because she is saving and helping quote unquote enemy forces and allowing them to live and tell their stories. And what gets me is like how heartbreaking it was that Isabel, who took risks, who had courage, who fell in love boldly, who declared herself and all of her feelings, she died quite young. It makes me so sad to see how Isabel's story ended, because that was probably the outcome of too many people. I mean, beyond just people of Jewish identity, beyond people who were gay or disabled, political prisoners. Basically, Isabel was put in a concentration camp towards the end because they wanted information on who the Nightingale was, and she would not tell them who the Nightingale was. And her father came forward and said that he was the Nightingale, and they killed him. They took Isabel and put her in a concentration camp, and her spirit was completely broken. Her body was completely broken, but she did not let them have her. And, you know, to see that kind of suffering, to live that kind of suffering every day. She didn't die until she got home, until she saw her loved ones. When she saw her love, when she saw Vian, she didn't let herself die until then, until they were freed. So maybe there was some part of her soul that really knew that she had to hang on, that she wouldn't die at the hands of these monsters, that she would live to see freedom. And Vienne, who played it safe the whole time, does get to live to old age and does get to have a child born of hatred and violence. But she does not let the Nazis take that away from her either. That is her child. Regardless of how he was conceived or what happened, that is her child, and he grows up to be a fantastic person. Because Vienne will not let them win. These two women, they will not let them win in their final moments, in their most horrific acts. They will not let them win. And that is just so heart-wrenching. I mean, the last few chapters where I was in the park reading them, and they literally had me crying because I had to keep like closing the book every couple of chapters because I was like, I don't want it to end, and I don't want the pain anymore. But then I would open it back up because I was like, I need to finish it. And Hannah's writing is just so it's so poetic and it's so moving and emotional, and you really just hear the voices of all these characters come to life. Anyway, so both of these women, I think, were extraordinarily courageous in their own ways. And it's so easy to judge them either way as people who either didn't live in that time, or we know how it ended. It's so easy for us to judge what happens when we know how it ends. And all we can do is take history and apply it to our present day. And I think that's where things get muddied, because with so much information out there now on social media and the internet, it feels as though propaganda can spread so easily. Misinformation can spread so easily. There's just so much out there that feels like glaring red flags. And 20 years from now, 30 years, however long from now, we will probably look back at this time in our state and just think like, how could we not have seen that? And I think that's it's an interesting thing that Kristin Hannah sets up, is how quickly these things can happen. How quickly these orange or yellow flags turn to glaring red alarms. And when are we willing to realize that? When are we willing to take a stance, to show up and fight back, and how to do that? Because I think that both of these women did the best they could with the circumstances that they had, and that's not a fault of theirs, Anyway, I really love the book. It made me think a lot, and it made me consider where I am today and what I am doing today. Today as in like the general today, not like today. I would definitely recommend this, especially for people who don't like historical fiction. Give it a try, because I think Kristin Hannah makes it doesn't feel cringy, and it doesn't feel convoluted in the details. It feels very modern, and it feels very moving, and very strong voices of characters. All right, that's it. That's all I had to say. Okay, my cat didn't interrupt me this time. Bye.